When King Midas wished that everything he touched would turn to gold, he ultimately found himself starving, surrounded by cold metal. Humanity had a similar wish granted a century ago, when we figured out how to turn crude oil into a cheap, moldable marvel, synthetic polymers. In decades, this incredibly lightweight and durable material saturated our environment. We manufactured it into our clothes, our phones, our appliances, and our homes. Synthetic polymers are essentially long, repeating chains of molecules designed to withstand immense wear, meaning a single piece of plastic takes between 500 and 1,000 years to decompose. Yet we collectively decided to take this highly durable, centuries-lasting material and use 40% of it for packaging, items intended to be used for 5 minutes and then thrown away. We took a marvel of permanent chemical engineering and applied it to temporary human convenience. That mismatch created a global trap we are still trying to escape. This volumetric model reveals the physical footprint of mass-producing and immortal material. The towering cube represents the 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic humanity has generated since its invention. Recycling mitigates very little of this. Nearly 80% of that material remains in the environment as permanent trash, with roughly 8 million tons washing into our riverways and oceans every single year. When this waste floats in the ocean, it does not biodegrade and return to the soil like an apple core. Instead, harsh UV radiation from the sun bakes the plastic, turning it brittle until it splinters into thousands of microscopic shards called microplastics. These fragments, measuring less than 5 millimeters across, are easily swallowed by zooplankton. They bioaccumulate up the food chain, carrying highly toxic chemical additives with them until they eventually land on our dinner plates and inside our own bodies. Choking marine life and ingesting toxic microplastics is a terrifying physical reality, but the pollution we can actually see in the water is only half the planetary crisis. This chart tracks global greenhouse gas emissions by country, revealing a massive, invisible problem. If the plastic life cycle were a nation, it would be the world's 5th largest emitter, sitting directly behind China, the US, India, and Russia. Long before a plastic bottle reaches the ocean, its life cycle begins deep underground. Extracting these fossil fuels requires intense mining, drilling, and fracking. These processes leak immense amounts of methane, a highly potent heat-trapping gas. Those extracted fuels are then transported to sprawling cracking plants and refineries. Here, ethane is broken down to build plastic polymers in a highly energy-intensive process that vents over 2 million tons of carbon dioxide annually. Even at the end of its useful life, plastic keeps emitting. When we manage this waste by burning it in incinerators or let it bake in a landfill, it continues off-gassing methane. From its violent extraction through centuries of breaking down, it actively accelerates global warming. The true severity of those emissions becomes clear when we look at how they impact the Earth's primary defense mechanism. The ocean is the world's largest carbon sink, actively absorbing a quarter of human-made emissions and 90% of the excess heat. This diagram shows a dangerous physical feedback loop. As greenhouse gases heat the atmosphere, the ocean's surface warms. Because CO2 is less soluble in warm water, the ocean absorbs fewer emissions. The CO2 it does absorb forms carbonic acid, severely dropping the water's pH. This widespread ocean acidification dissolves carbonate ions. Without these vital building blocks, keystone species like clams, oysters, and the phytoplankton that support the entire marine food web cannot grow their shells. The physical toll of this warming and acidification is catastrophic. Coral reefs, supporting a quarter of marine life, experience massive die-offs, leaving stark, skeletal graveyards. By generating an enormous volume of invisible greenhouse gases, the plastic life cycle is suffocating the ecosystem that protects us from the impacts of climate change. Faced with a crisis this severe, the most obvious answer seems to be a total, immediate ban on all plastics. However, abruptly eliminating the material creates an unexpected environmental trap. This scale balances life cycle carbon emissions, and the math is counterintuitive. Manufacturing a single-use plastic bag requires so little energy compared to a reusable cotton bag, you'd have to use that cotton bag 7,100 times to break even. Plastic also plays a critical utilitarian role in the global food supply. Rotting food in landfills is an enormous source of methane emissions, and plastic packaging remains the most highly efficient tool we have to prevent food from spoiling before it gets eaten. Furthermore, the vast majority of physical ocean plastic originates from rapid industrialization occurring in specific developing regions of the world. Many nations modernized so quickly that their local garbage disposal infrastructure simply couldn't scale fast enough to capture the new wave of waste. If we panic and blindly swap out plastic for less carbon-efficient materials without addressing how we manage global waste, we risk worsening the exact climate crisis we are trying to stop. Escaping this paradox requires us to stop looking for a magical replacement material and instead rethink the entire economic system from the ground up. This diagram illustrates the circular economy. Instead of a linear process where we extract, use, and discard, this loop keeps resources in continuous circulation. Closing it requires funding global waste infrastructure to capture escaped trash, while halting new fossil fuel extraction. It also requires consumer brands to redesign their products so that the materials they use never lose their value, guaranteeing they can be melted down and remanufactured endlessly. We discovered a truly indestructible chemical miracle. To survive the climate crisis it accelerated, we have to outgrow our need for disposable, temporary convenience.